A large, red-eyed, human-sized creature that flies? But if such a creature exists, where could it have come from?
The mystery of the Mothman is one of the strangest legends in American folklore. And today, you'll discover the shocking truth. For over a year in the mid-1960s, more than 100 people in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, reported seeing a bizarre winged creature with glowing red eyes. These sightings began with one chilling encounter and spiraled into a wave of fear, speculation, and headlines across the country. But what really stunned everyone was the way these sightings came to a sudden end, right after an unexpected tragedy struck the community. That eerie coincidence has fueled decades of debate. Was the Mothman a monster, a warning, or just a case of mass hysteria? Well, stay tuned, because by the end of this video, you'll realize the answer is nothing like what you've been told. The legend takes flight. Over the years, countless explanations have been proposed to solve the Mothman puzzle. Scientists, skeptics, and believers all put forward competing theories, some ordinary, others unbelievable. Wildlife experts argued that the so-called Mothman was no supernatural being at all, but simply a case of mistaken identity. The sandhill crane became one of the leading candidates. Standing nearly as tall as a man with wings stretching 7 feet across, this bird's features could easily appear monstrous in the right conditions. Even more unsettling, the red patches around its eyes could reflect car headlights at night, giving the illusion of glowing crimson eyes. Robert L. Smith, a biologist from West Virginia University, championed this view, saying the crane matched many witness descriptions. Other skeptics, like investigator Joe Nickel, suggested the barred owl. This bird, unlike the common barn owl, has powerful reflective eyes that can shine a piercing red when struck by light at night. Seen out of context, especially in the foggy, wooded areas around Point Pleasant, such an owl could look terrifying. Still, not everyone was convinced by bird theories. Some residents pointed to the TNT area, an abandoned World War II munitions site near town, where chemicals had long seeped into the soil and ponds. Could toxic contamination have created a mutated creature? A monstrous crane or owl, twisted by pollution, was the theory many locals whispered about. It sounded like something out of a comic book, but it gave a natural explanation for a seemingly unnatural figure. And then there were the psychological theories. Psychologists explained that fear spreads quickly in small towns, creating what's called a collective delusion. Once the media reported on a monster, people became primed to see one. Add a few hoaxes, like pranksters tying flashlights to balloons, or a small plane buzzing the riverbanks at night, and suddenly, an ordinary town was caught in an extraordinary storm of paranoia. Yet even if some sightings could be explained away, one question remained. What about the very first witnesses? Before the hoaxes, before the hysteria, before the newspapers picked up the story, what exactly did those people see on that November night in 1966? That's where our story truly begins. The first sightings that started it all. Unlike other legends that build slowly over decades, the Mothman story erupted into public awareness almost overnight. Point Pleasant, West Virginia, was a quiet community, the kind of place where life moved at an easy pace. But all of that changed on the night of November 15th, 1966. That evening, two young couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, along with Steve and Mary Mallett, were driving through a remote stretch near the old TNT area. This abandoned World War II munitions site was already infamous for its strange atmosphere. The land was dotted with concrete bunkers called igloos, overgrown by brush and weeds, and surrounded by the decaying remains of a once bustling explosives plant. Locals already whispered about its eerie presence, calling it a place you didn't dare explore after dark. As the four friends drove past the empty ruins, something caught their attention, a figure unlike anything they had ever seen before. Linda later described it as a tall, humanoid shape, nearly 7 feet in height, with huge, folded wings and blazing red eyes that seemed to glow from within. She said the creature's eyes were so hypnotic, so terrifying, that she felt paralyzed just looking at them. Panicked, the couple slammed the accelerator and tried to flee, but the nightmare had only just begun. The winged figure took flight and chased their car down the highway, swooping above and around them. They claimed it kept pace with their car, even as they pushed close to 100 miles per hour, refusing to let them escape until they reached the edge of town. Only then did the creature vanish into the darkness. Shaken and terrified, the group rushed to report what they had seen to local authorities. By morning, their story was front-page news. The Point Pleasant Register ran the unforgettable headline, "Couples See Man-Sized Bird. Creature Something." The words captured the confusion perfectly. No one could agree on what had appeared in the shadows, but everyone knew it was far from ordinary. And soon, more reports came flooding in. Within days, additional witnesses described seeing the same winged being, often near the TNT area. Some spotted it flying overhead, while others swore it was standing silently in the trees, its glowing eyes fixed on them. Even 2 volunteer firefighters added their voices, saying they saw a large bird with red eyes. The local sheriff, George Johnson, tried to calm the hysteria with a simpler explanation. He suggested people were mistaking a shite poke, a regional term for a type of heron, for a monster. But as many residents pointed out, could a heron chase a car at highway speeds? Could its eyes shine red like burning coals? Those doubts lingered. At the same time, local journalist Mary Heyer of the Athens Messenger became one of the most important figures in the unfolding mystery. She covered the Scarberry and Millette sighting with the headline, "Winged Red-Eyed Thing Chases Point, Pleasant Couples Across Countryside." From that point on, she chronicled the ongoing wave of reports, separating pranksters from genuinely frightened townspeople. Her work ensured that the Mothman story was no passing rumor. It became a documented phenomenon. The TNT area itself only deepened the fear. The overgrown bunkers, toxic ponds, and crumbling buildings created a haunting backdrop. And years later, officials confirmed that the soil and water were indeed contaminated with hazardous chemicals left behind from explosives manufacturing. Some began to wonder, could this poisoned land have birthed a creature of nightmare? By late 1966, Point Pleasant had transformed into a place of tension and fascination. Families carried guns in their cars, hoping to protect themselves if the creature appeared. Teenagers flocked to the TNT area with cameras, flashlights, and nervous laughter, hoping to see the legendary figure for themselves. But no clear photographs or proof ever surfaced. All the town had were eyewitnesses, and the unforgettable image of a winged, red-eyed being haunting the darkness. And so, a single night in November became the spark for one of America's most chilling legends. But the story didn't end with sightings. Soon, something much darker tied the Mothman to tragedy, a disaster that would etch the creature permanently into history. The Silver Bridge collapse and its eerie timing. Exactly 13 months after the first reported sighting, Point Pleasant would experience a disaster so devastating that it forever cemented the Mothman in legend. On December 15, 1967, at precisely 4:58 p.m., the Silver Bridge, a 2,200-foot-long suspension bridge connecting Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to Gallipolis, Ohio, collapsed without warning. For nearly 4 decades, the Silver Bridge had carried thousands of cars and trucks across the Ohio River. On that cold December evening, holiday traffic was heavy. Families were shopping, workers were heading home, and trucks hauled goods across the span. Then, in an instant, disaster struck. Eyewitnesses described the horror in haunting detail. A coal truck driver later said the bridge didn't simply fall, it twisted violently, like a snake in its death throes, before breaking apart. Steel beams groaned and snapped. Cars pitched sideways. Dozens of vehicles were flung into the freezing river below. Charlene Foster, another witness, recalled that the collapse looked like a chain reaction, one piece giving way after another in a dreadful cascade. She remembered screaming in disbelief. The images burned into her memory for the rest of her life. In mere seconds, 31 vehicles plunged into the icy waters, carrying 64 people with them. By the time rescuers arrived, the devastation was unimaginable. 46 lives were lost, making it the deadliest bridge disaster in modern U.S. history at the time. 2 victims were never recovered, their bodies lost to the river forever. Investigators eventually determined the cause: a tiny fracture, barely 1/10 of an inch deep, hidden within I-bar number 330 of the suspension chain. The Silver Bridge had been built in 1928 using I-bar chain technology. Unlike most suspension bridges that had redundant chains, the Silver Bridge relied on just one per side. When that small crack caused one I-bar to fail, the entire structure collapsed. A flaw so minuscule brought down a bridge carrying hundreds of tons of steel and concrete. For the engineers, this was an issue of design and metal fatigue. But for the people of Point Pleasant, the tragedy carried a darker question. Why did this disaster happen exactly 1 year after the Mothman first appeared? The timing was impossible to ignore. Many believed the Mothman and the bridge collapse were connected. Some whispered that the creature had caused the disaster, a harbinger of destruction who brought ruin wherever it appeared. Others believed the opposite, that the Mothman had been trying to warn the town of impending doom, its terrifying presence a message no one could understand until it was too late. Witnesses even claimed they saw the Mothman perched on the Silver Bridge earlier that day, as though it had come to watch the catastrophe unfold. Whether it was there as an omen, an instigator, or a helpless observer, no one could say. But one thing was clear. After the bridge fell, the sightings stopped. The red-eyed figure that had terrified the town for over a year seemed to vanish completely from Point Pleasant. And yet, the strangeness of those months didn't end with the creature. Residents reported a host of other bizarre events in the lead-up to the disaster: mysterious lights darting in the skies, shadowy figures in long, dark coats, the so-called men in black, asking unsettling questions around town, phones ringing with static-filled calls, animals behaving violently for no reason, and even a low, unexplainable humming that seemed to hang in the air. All of it ceased abruptly after the Silver Bridge collapse, leaving many to wonder if it had all been connected. So the question that haunted the people of Point Pleasant, and continues to fascinate the world today, was simple. Was the Mothman a bringer of doom, or a desperate warning of what was to come? That chilling debate gave rise to an idea that would shape the way we think about the Mothman even now. It became known as the Harbinger Theory, and it's here that the legend of the Mothman shifted from a local scare into a global mystery. The rise of the Harbinger Theory. In the wake of the Silver Bridge disaster, Point Pleasant was left with more than grief. It was left with a question that still unsettles people to this day. What exactly had the Mothman been? Was it a monster, or was it a messenger? This is where the Harbinger Theory was born. The idea that the Mothman doesn't cause tragedy, but warns of it. The theory's biggest champion was John Keel, a journalist and paranormal investigator who arrived in Point Pleasant during the height of the sightings. He spent months interviewing witnesses, compiling reports, and experiencing strange phenomena himself. In 1975, Keel published The Mothman Prophecies, a book that forever changed how the creature was understood. Keel argued that the Mothman was not an animal or a hoax, but part of something much larger, a prophetic force tied to human tragedy. He believed the residents of Point Pleasant had been experiencing precognitive visions, dreams, and encounters all pointing toward the bridge collapse. The Mothman, in his view, was not the cause, but the warning. Keel's theory reframed the story in haunting terms. He suggested the Mothman was like a window washer on a skyscraper. Not God, not all-knowing, but positioned just high enough to see further down the street than we can. From that vantage point, it might see a disaster before it happens, but it cannot stop it. This idea cast the Mothman as a tragic figure, doomed to appear before catastrophe, but powerless to prevent it. The Harbinger Theory didn't stay in West Virginia. As Keel's book spread, so did claims of similar sightings elsewhere. Russian ufologists, for example, later alleged that a Mothman-like creature appeared in Moscow before the 1999 apartment bombings, which killed hundreds. Others linked reports of winged figures to disasters in Asia and South America. The implication was terrifying. The Mothman might not be a local oddity, but a global omen. Folklorists and skeptics argued that this was simply the human need to find meaning in chaos. After all, when tragedy strikes, people often look for signs they missed, patterns they could not see. But for believers, the connections were too many, too precise to dismiss. To them, the Mothman was not just a myth. It was a messenger that appears on the threshold of disaster, forever tied to humanity's darkest moments. This chilling interpretation reshaped the legend, turning the Mothman into something far more than a scary story. It became a symbol, not of fear itself, but of forewarning, a spectral reminder that the world holds mysteries we may never fully understand. And yet, the Mothman wasn't destined to remain just a figure of doom. Over time, Point Pleasant and the wider world found a way to transform this frightening legend into something unexpected, even hopeful. How Mothman became a cultural icon. If you want to understand how a community can transform tragedy into identity, you only need to look at Point Pleasant. In the years following the Silver Bridge collapse, the Mothman remained a shadow over the town, a reminder of fear, loss, and unanswered questions. But over time, that shadow evolved into something much bigger, a source of pride, culture, and even economic survival. Much of that transformation began with John Keel's 1975 book, The Mothman Prophecies. By documenting the eyewitness accounts and connecting the creature to the Silver Bridge collapse, Keel ensured the legend wouldn't fade into obscurity. His work turned Mothman from a local scare into an international mystery. Then, in 2002, Hollywood took the story global. Director Mark Pellington released the Mothman Prophecies film, starring Richard Gere and Laura Linney. The movie fictionalized Keel as John Klein, but carried forward the themes of prophecy, tragedy, and mystery. While critics were divided, audiences were captivated. The film grossed more than $55 million worldwide and introduced millions of people to Point Pleasant's eerie legend. It didn't matter that the movie blurred fact and fiction. It made the Mothman unforgettable. The impact on Point Pleasant was enormous. Tourism surged, and locals embraced the legend as a way to rebuild their identity. By the early 2000s, the town had launched the annual Mothman Festival, held every third weekend in September. What started as a small gathering soon ballooned into an event drawing 10,000 to 12,000 visitors each year, double the town's population. The festival features guest speakers, vendors, live music, food trucks, and guided tours of the TNT area where the sightings began. Locals say it has saved the town, bringing in money, energy, and attention that Point Pleasant desperately needed. In 2003, artist Bob Roach unveiled the 12-foot metallic Mothman statue in the heart of downtown. With rippling steel muscles, wide wings, and gleaming red eyes, the statue quickly became a photo magnet for tourists. Just 2 years later, in 2005, lifelong resident Jeff Wamsley founded the world's only Mothman museum, packed with eyewitness reports, newspaper clippings, and even props from the 2002 film. For just a few dollars, visitors could step directly into the history that once terrified the town. Today, the museum is Point Pleasant's top-rated attraction, proof that the legend isn't just alive, it thrives. But Mothman didn't stop in Point Pleasant. In recent decades, new reports have surfaced far from West Virginia. Between 2011 and 2017, Chicago became a hotspot for sightings, with over 55 encounters in a single year. Witnesses described a large bat-like creature with glowing red eyes, sometimes perched on rooftops, other times swooping over cars, and frequently spotted near O'Hare International Airport. Paranormal researchers documented more than 170 credible cases by 2023. Many reported by airline staff and ground workers. Was it hysteria? A hoax? Or proof that the Mothman was a harbinger once again? Meanwhile, the internet only amplified the fascination. Online forums, YouTube videos, and social media groups kept the legend alive, while Etsy shops sold everything from Mothman t-shirts and mugs to candles and plush toys. Video games like Fallout 76 and Magic. The gathering featured the creature as a cryptid icon. The Mothman wasn't just a mystery anymore, it was pop culture. Folklorists explained this endurance by pointing to the power of myth. In times of uncertainty, people turn to stories that balance fear with fascination. The Mothman, they said, is less about a winged creature and more about humanity's hunger for mystery. The need to believe that some questions still can't be answered by science. And that may be why, decades later, the the Mothman still captivates us. Because whether you believe it's a bird, a mutant, a hoax, or a harbinger, the story offers something we secretly crave: the possibility that the world is stranger, scarier, and more magical than we ever imagined. And so, the story of the Mothman continues to linger in the shadows, part folklore, part mystery, part cultural phenomenon. From those first terrifying encounters in Point Pleasant to the devastating collapse of the Silver Bridge, the creature has been tied to events that no one can fully explain. Was it a monster stalking a town? A mutated bird born of poisoned land? A hoax that spiraled out of control? Or was it something far more haunting? A harbinger, a messenger of doom, appearing only when tragedy was near? For Point Pleasant, the Mothman is no longer just a source of fear. It has become a symbol of resilience, a legend that draws people from across the world to a small town in West Virginia every year. For believers, it stands as proof that some mysteries walk among us, unseen until they choose to reveal themselves. For skeptics, it is a fascinating example of how stories evolve, blending truth, fear, and imagination into something that feels larger than life. But here's the unsettling truth. Sightings didn't end in the 1960s. They've surfaced in cities, near airports, before disasters, and in places far from West Virginia. Which means the Mothman is not just a chapter of the past. It may still be out there, waiting, watching, appearing when we least expect it. And that leaves us with the same chilling question that people in Point Pleasant asked nearly 60 years ago. What did they really see? Was it coincidence, imagination, or something beyond our understanding? Maybe one day we'll know. Or maybe the mystery is meant to remain, forever perched on the edge of fear and wonder. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Mothman mystery, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of legends, mysteries, and hidden truths. And if you're ready for another chilling tale, click the video that's on your screen right now. Because trust me, you don't want to miss it.